I have been kind my entire life. Not as a performance, not as a strategy, simply as a fact of my nature, as much a part of me as my height or the color of my eyes. I am the person who holds the door, who remembers birthdays, who says yes when she means yes, and, for a long time, said yes when she meant no because the disappointment on the other person's face was something I had never learned to tolerate. For a long time, I believed this was a virtue. For a long time, the people around me agreed. At least, they agreed in the sense that they accepted the kindness gratefully and without particular reflection on what it cost the person offering it. Some of them, however, did not experience it as virtue at all. Some of them experienced it as availability, as an open door through which they could walk whenever the need arose, without knocking, without asking, without wondering whether the door was open because it had been chosen or because it simply didn't know how to close. My name is Teresa. I am 37 years old. I have been kind for 37 years, and I intend to be kind for however many years remain to me. But I am no longer available to be mistaken. Kindness is a choice. It is, in fact, one of the strongest choices a person can make, because it requires something, it costs something, and it is given freely in a world that does not always recognize the giving. What it is not, what it was never, is weakness. And the day I understood that distinction, and the events that led me there, are what I want to share with you today. I grew up in a house where kindness was not only valued but required. My mother was the warmest person I have known, genuinely, completely warm, the kind of woman who made everyone who entered her home feel immediately that they were the most important guest she had ever received. Her kindness was real, but it was also, I understand now, sometimes self-erasing. She gave and gave and gave to the people around her with the particular completeness of someone who has made giving the whole of her identity, and there were costs in her life that she absorbed quietly because absorbing quietly was what kindness looked like to her. I learned from her. I learned the warmth, which was genuinely hers and genuinely mine. And I learned, without knowing I was learning it, the self-erasure, the idea that my needs were secondary, that a truly kind person does not require reciprocity, that making others comfortable is its own reward regardless of what it costs the comforter. By the time I was in my late 20s, I had built a career and a social life and a set of relationships on this foundation. I worked in human resources at a mid-sized company in Seattle, a job that requires, perhaps above all other qualities, the capacity to absorb other people's difficulties while maintaining a professional calm that does not reveal the cost of the absorbing. I was very good at my job. I was also, by the time I was 32, thoroughly exhausted in a way that I could not articulate because I had not developed the vocabulary for it. The exhaustion of someone who gives consistently and receives erratically, who smooths things over in every direction and wonders, occasionally and in private, whether anyone is smoothing things over for her. At work, there was a colleague named Derek. Derek was the kind of person who was very skilled at identifying the path of least resistance in every situation and taking it. He was not malicious. I want to be clear about that because malice is easy to identify and easy to respond to. Derek was simply very good at knowing who would and would not push back, and he had correctly identified me as someone who would not. For 3 years, Derek took credit for joint work in meetings while I sat beside him and said nothing. He asked me to cover his responsibilities when he needed something and expressed the thanks in the casual way of someone who expects the favor to be granted and is therefore not particularly grateful when it is. He redirected requests that should have gone to him toward me, saying things like, "Teresa is better at this kind of thing," in the tone of someone paying a compliment that is actually a reassignment. I absorbed it, every time. Not because I was unaware of what was happening. I was aware, with increasing clarity over the 3 years, but because addressing it would require a confrontation. And confrontation was something I had spent 32 years not knowing how to do with the people who were taking from me while I was still trying to be kind to them. The moment I stopped absorbing arrived in a meeting room on a Thursday afternoon. The project had been mine, primarily mine, with Derek in a supporting role that he had occupied inconsistently and with less contribution than the formal structure of the project would have suggested. 6 months of work. The presentation was mine. The research was mine. The relationships with the external partners were mine. Derek presented it, not because he had been asked to, because he had positioned himself at the front of the room before I arrived and had begun before I could readjust the situation without making it awkward. And I had let him begin, because making it awkward was something I did not do. At the end of the presentation, the senior director said, "Derek, excellent work. Really excellent." Derek said, "Thank you. Teresa was a big help." A big help. 6 months of primary work, distilled into a big help. I sat very still. The meeting continued. I contributed where contribution was needed. I was professional and composed and said nothing about what had just happened. And on the way out of the meeting room, Derek fell into step beside me and said, not unkindly, actually without any awareness that anything was amiss, "Good meeting. Thanks for your support on this one." Your support. I stopped walking. Not dramatically. I simply stopped. And I looked at Derek. And I said, quietly, without heat, with the particular clarity of someone who has finally decided to say a true thing, "Derek, that project was mine. The research, the strategy, the client relationships, those were mine. I would like you to understand that going forward. And I would like you to correct the impression in that room when the opportunity presents itself." He looked at me. I could see him recalibrating. I had not done this before. In 3 years of his taking and my allowing, this was the first time the dynamic had been named directly. He said, "I didn't mean to." I said, "I know. But it happened. And it matters." And I walked away. Pause. 5 seconds. I want to tell you what that felt like. Not triumphant. Not cathartic in the cinematic sense. Something quieter and, in its own way, more significant. It felt like ground. Like finding, unexpectedly, that the floor was there when I put my foot down. That saying the true thing had not caused the world to collapse or the relationship to permanently rupture or the room to fill with the particular awkwardness I had spent 32 years trying to prevent. It had simply happened. The true thing had been said. And the ground had held. And something in me understood that I had been treating the ground as optional for a very long time. I want to be clear about what changed after the meeting room. I did not become a different person. I did not suddenly become the kind of woman who is forthright to the point of aggression, who has traded her warmth for an armor of assertiveness, and who experiences every request for her time as a potential incursion to be defended against. That is not what finding your limits looks like, or not what it looked like for me. What changed was the internal architecture. I was still warm. I still held the door and remembered the birthdays and said yes when I meant yes. I still found genuine pleasure in helping people who needed help, because that pleasure is real and it is mine, and no amount of being taken advantage of has been able to remove it. But I added something. I added the question. Every time a request arrived, every time someone reached for my time or my energy or my willingness to accommodate, I started pausing. Not long. A breath. The space of a beat. And in that beat, I asked myself, is this kindness I am choosing? Or is this kindness I am unable to refuse? Because those are not the same thing. Chosen kindness is a gift. It comes from a full place and it goes to someone who has earned or genuinely needs it, and the giving does not hollow you out. Unchosen kindness, kindness that you offer because you have not developed the capacity to decline, that hollows you out, slowly, in ways that accumulate until the accumulated exhaustion is so complete that you cannot find the warmth that was always real because the excavation has reached it. I had been operating from unchosen kindness for 32 years. Not always. There were real relationships in my life, genuine friendships, my relationship with my mother, connections that were mutual and sustaining and that I would not change. But a significant portion of my available warmth had been going to the Dereks, to the people who had assessed me correctly as someone who did not know how to say no and who had built their own convenience on that assessment. I started saying no. Not to everyone. Not reflexively. With the same care I had always brought to saying yes, but now applied to the question of whether the yes was right rather than whether the yes was possible. Some people were surprised. Derek was surprised. He came to me 3 weeks after the meeting room with a request that was, by any reasonable assessment, a reassignment disguised as a compliment. "You're so much better at client communication than I am. Would you mind handling?" And I said, simply and without hostility, "I don't have the capacity for that this week, Derek. You'll want to handle it yourself." He handled it himself, and the world continued to turn. In the months after the meeting room, I did something I had not done before. I thought carefully about the kindness itself, not whether to practice it, that was not in question, but about its nature, about the difference between the things it actually was and the thing the Dereks of the world had decided it was. Kindness, I had been taught, implicitly, by my mother's example and by the cultural water I had been swimming in, was a softness, a yielding quality, something that prioritized the comfort of others over the comfort of self. But that definition, I had come to understand, was not kindness. That was accommodation. That was the particular survival strategy of people who have learned, for various reasons, that their own needs are less safe to express than other people. Kindness, actual kindness, the thing worth having and worth giving, was something different. I thought about the people in my life who I most associated with genuine kindness, not the ones who gave endlessly without limit. There was something in their giving that was not quite what I was looking for, but the ones who gave fully and freely from a place that was also clearly boundaries, who helped with complete generosity when they chose to help and declined when they chose to decline, without apology in either direction, whose yes meant something because their no was equally real. Those people were kind, and they were also, in a way that the endless givers were not, genuinely powerful. Because their kindness was a choice rather than a compulsion, it carried weight. When they helped, you knew it meant something. When they were warm, you knew the warmth was real. There was no undertow of resentment or exhaustion, no sense that you were accepting a gift that was costing the giver more than they had. That was what I wanted to be. Not less kind. More kind, in the sense of being more genuinely kind, in the sense of offering the real thing rather than the extracted thing. I talked to my mother about this. She is 71 years old. She listened to me describe what I had been understanding, and she was quiet for a while after I finished. And then she said, "I wish someone had told me that at 37. We sat with that together for a while. And then she said, "The kindness was always real, Teresa. In you and in me. We just confused the offering of it with the obligation of it. They are different things. They are different things." And understanding the difference, 37 years into my life, has been one of the most significant recalibrations I have ever undergone. I want to tell you what my life looks like now. Not dramatically different, in the visible sense. I still work in HR. I still live in Seattle. I still hold the door and remember the birthdays and say yes when I mean yes, but the texture is different. I have more energy, not because I am doing less. I am, in some ways, doing more, but because the energy I am spending is being spent by choice rather than by default. There is a significant difference between the exhaustion of chosen effort and the exhaustion of obligation. The first is the tiredness of a runner at the end of a good race. The second is the tiredness of someone who has been running because they cannot find a way to stop. My relationships are more honest. Not because I am more confrontational. Confrontation for its own sake is not something I value or practice. But because I am less available to be uncomfortable on someone else's behalf, and that unavailability has, paradoxically, made the relationships I do invest in richer and more real. People who are accustomed to the automatic yes have drifted, mostly, to other sources of automatic yes. What remains are the people who are there because they want to be there, because they value the relationship itself rather than what the relationship provides. Those relationships are better than anything I had before. Derek, for his part, corrected the impression in the room. Not dramatically. He mentioned, in a subsequent meeting where the project came up, that Teresa had been the primary driver and that his contribution had been in a supporting capacity. It was a small correction. It mattered to me. I do not think Derek understood why I had said what I said in the hallway after the meeting. I do not think he fully understood the 3 years that preceded it, But I think he understood that the dynamic had changed, and he adjusted accordingly. Some people adjust when the ground shifts. The ones who don't, the ones who responded to my new limits not with adjustment but with escalation or confusion or the particular resentment of someone whose source of easy yes has dried up, those people are no longer in my daily life in any significant sense. I did not remove them deliberately. I simply redirected the energy I had been giving them toward things and people that were actually worth it. And in the redirection, those relationships found their natural level, which, in most cases, was considerably lower than where they had been. And that is fine. That is, in fact, exactly right. The karma in this story is not Derek's comeuppance. I want to say that clearly because the easy version of this story would have Derek fail in some visible and satisfying way that demonstrated the consequences of taking a kind person's contributions without credit. That would be tidy. It would also not be the point. Derek adjusted. He became, in the relationship we now have, a more equitable colleague, not a transformed person. He is still the person who will take the path of least resistance when it is available. But the path of least resistance no longer runs through me because I have changed the terrain. The karma in this story belongs to me. It is the recalibration itself, the understanding, arrived at the hard way through 32 years of giving without limit and 5 minutes in a hallway, that kindness is a choice and that making it a choice rather than a compulsion is not a diminishment of the kindness, it is the completion of it. The karma is also the energy. All of the energy that was going to the Dereks and the automatic yeses and the accommodation of people who had assessed me as available rather than kind. That energy is available to me now. And I have been astonished in the years since the recalibration by how much there was, by how full I can be when the fullness is not being continuously extracted. I am kind now in a way I was not kind before. Not more genuinely. And that is the best thing I have ever done for the people in my life. And the best thing I have ever done for myself. I want to say something to the kind people, the ones who are reading this and recognizing themselves in it, who are warm and present and giving and who have, at some point, experienced the particular confusion of having those qualities received as an invitation rather than a gift. Your kindness is not the problem. Your kindness is one of the most valuable things about you. Do not let the experience of being taken advantage of teach you that you should be less kind. That is the wrong lesson, and learning it would be a loss for you and for every person who receives your kindness as the gift it actually is. The lesson is different. The lesson is that kindness is not the same as availability, that the warmth is yours and the choice of who receives it is also yours, that a yes which is not freely given is not actually a yes, it is an extraction. And that the difference between a gift and an extraction is not in the thing transferred but in the power of the person doing the transferring. You have the power. You have always had the power to choose, to pause in the breath before the automatic yes and ask, is this kindness I am offering, or is this kindness I am being taken from? And on the days when the answer is the second, on the days when the request is not about your kindness but about someone else's convenience, you are allowed to say no. Not with anger, not with the abandonment of the kindness that has always been yours, just with the quiet, certain understanding that kindness given from a full and chosen place is the only kindness worth giving, and that saying no, when no is what you mean, is itself an act of kindness to yourself and ultimately to the person you are no longer pretending to serve freely. Your limits are not a contradiction of your kindness, they are its completion. This has been Soul Tales. My name is Teresa. This morning, I held the door for a stranger, because I wanted to, because that is who I am, and no one is taking that from me again.